It was a cold night in East Ham, East London. Just after 11 p.m, a black Toyota Prius taxi was driving through the quiet streets. In the back seat sat 26-year-old Anselm Sainaj. He had no idea that people were waiting for him just around the corner. Suddenly, a silver Mitsubishi pulled in front of the taxi, blocking its path. 3 masked men jumped out. They were dressed in dark clothes and carried huge knives. Before the driver or Sainaj could react, they rushed toward the car. The attackers didn't open the doors, they went straight for the windows. One of them stabbed Sainaj in the chest while he was still sitting in the back seat. The attack lasted only seconds. Then, just as quickly, the men ran back to the Mitsubishi and drove off. Sainaj died at the scene. Despite the efforts of emergency services, there was nothing they could do. This wasn't a robbery or a random fight. This was a planned ambush. Police later said it was connected to a drug dispute. It was a shocking act of violence carried out in public, and it left 1 man dead and 4 others on their way to prison. Anselm Sainaj had enemies. That much was clear. He wasn't just a name in someone's phone. He was part of East London's drug scene, and with that came danger. By the time November 2023 rolled around, police believe he'd been involved in dealing heroin and crack cocaine. Not high-level operations, but enough to put him in the crosshairs. The people who came after him didn't make noise about it. They didn't post threats online or show up shouting on street corners. They planned, quietly, precisely. At the top of the group was 24-year-old Mohammed Saqib Khan, a man with a violent past and ties to criminal networks beyond London. He was known to police, known to others in the scene, and known for making people disappear when they crossed him. But he didn't act alone. With him were Mohammed Samuel Mayer, Zain Ali and Ibrahim Naim, men from the same streets with the same code and the same need to protect territory. The plan didn't come together overnight. Phone records later showed weeks of contact between them. Messages were sent, burner phones were used, and meetups were arranged across East London. There were no written instructions, just short calls, vague texts, voice notes passed between men who already knew what had to be done. The silver Mitsubishi was central to it all. It had been stolen earlier that autumn and kept out of sight until the night of the attack. CCTV later showed the car moving through East Ham, circling the area in the days leading up to November 11th. It wasn't random. The group knew where Sainaj lived, they knew his habits, and they knew eventually they'd get their moment. What's striking about this part of the story is how ordinary it looked from the outside. The men weren't hiding in back alleys or whispering in bars. They were sitting in coffee shops, riding around the borough, blending into the city like anyone else. One key meeting happened in a Costa Coffee in King's Heath. Just 3 men, having a quiet chat about what would soon turn into murder. Zain Ali had a specific role. He was the one who got Sainaj into the taxi. He'd been released from prison not long before and wasted no time getting back into the game. Police believe he was the link between Sainaj and the others, luring him into a situation he couldn't escape from. Meanwhile, Khan kept his distance. He didn't send texts that could be traced or show up on camera. He used others to move the plan forward. When the time came, he stepped in, only to finish the job. Sainaj likely had an idea something was coming. He was carrying drugs the night he died. His phone contained messages pointing to conflicts, possibly debts or turf issues. But by the time he realized how serious it was, he was already in the taxi, already moving, already being watched. The wheels were in motion. There was no way out. It was just after 11 p.m. when the taxi carrying Anselm Sainaj pulled onto the quiet streets of East Ham. He sat in the back, unaware that danger was just moments away. Then, a silver Mitsubishi pulled in front of the cab, forcing it to stop. Before the driver could react, 3 masked men jumped out. Witnesses later described how fast it happened. The men were dressed in dark clothes, faces hidden, weapons drawn. 2 carried long knives, machete-style blades that were unmistakably meant for serious harm. The 3rd stood nearby, watching. In just seconds, they surrounded the taxi, cutting off all escape. Sainaj didn't even have time to open the door. One of the attackers lunged through the open window and drove a knife into Sainaj's chest. He couldn't fight back. Trapped in the back seat, caught off guard, he had no chance. The blade went deep. The others stood ready in case he tried to run, but he didn't. He collapsed in the car as blood poured out across the seat, staining his clothes and the interior. Then, just as quickly, they were gone. The attackers jumped back into the Mitsubishi, which sped off into the darkness. The entire assault lasted no more than 20 seconds. But in that time, Anselam Sainaj had suffered a fatal wound. By the time emergency services arrived, there was nothing they could do. The taxi driver, shaken but unharmed, told police everything he could. He said Sainaj had seemed nervous before the attack. He kept looking over his shoulder, then suddenly told the driver, "They're going to kill me." Moments later, his prediction came true. Paramedics tried desperately to save him. They performed CPR at the scene, but the wound was too severe. The knife had pierced his chest and caused massive internal bleeding. He was pronounced dead before he could even be taken to hospital. One detail that struck officers was the total silence of the attack. No words were exchanged, no threats shouted. It was all done with a cold, deliberate silence, just movement, blades, and blood. The kind of quiet that speaks to experience. These weren't panicked kids lashing out. They were focused, calm, and gone in seconds. For detectives, the attack had the feel of a gang hit, quick, precise, and with a clear target. The fact that Sainaj was carrying drugs added weight to that theory. He had reason to be afraid, and it was clear from the way the attackers moved that this was not their first time planning violence. By morning, the silver Mitsubishi was found burned out, torched completely, parked on a quiet street just miles away. It was stolen, of course. The fire had destroyed most evidence inside, but it was too late. The police already had CCTV, witness accounts, and soon, phone data to work from. They didn't know all the names yet, but they knew this was more than a street fight. It was organized, it was personal, and it was ruthless. And the men who did it hadn't disappeared as cleanly as they thought. The investigation was just beginning, and the city was about to learn how quickly the net can tighten. After the brutal killing of Anselam Sainaj, detectives from the Met Specialist Crime Command took over the case. It was clear from the beginning that this wasn't a random attack. The way the suspects acted, the weapons, the getaway, the burned-out car, told police this was a planned, targeted hit. The first piece of the puzzle came from CCTV. Officers scanned hours of footage, tracking the silver Mitsubishi across East Ham. Before and after the killing, the car appeared on multiple cameras. It was traced back to a location in Manor Park, close to where some of the suspects lived. Detectives found more footage showing men getting in and out of the car in the days before the murder, often wearing hoods and masks. Phone data was next. The number plate recognition system, ANPR, had picked up the car earlier in the day, and mobile phone signals around the same area showed patterns. Several suspects had been using burner phones, but mistakes were made. Some phones had connected to masts near the scene, too close for comfort. Others had shared locations with phones linked to known drug dealers. The investigation moved fast. Within 2 weeks, 3 suspects were in custody: Zain Ali, Ibrahim Naim, and Muhammad Samuel Mia. All were picked up in raids across East London. Police found clothes matching the CCTV footage, burner phones, and, in some cases, leftover packaging connected to the stolen Mitsubishi. But the 4th man, Mohammed Saqib Khan, had vanished. He'd fled the country just days after the murder, slipping out of the UK and heading to the Netherlands. It was a calculated move, but not clever enough. An international arrest warrant was issued, and in January 2024, Khan was arrested in Amsterdam. Working with Dutch police, British officers arranged his extradition. Within weeks, he was back in the UK, sitting in a police cell. Detectives now had all 4 suspects. The Crown Prosecution Service began preparing charges. The case relied on strong evidence: CCTV, witness statements, phone records, and forensic data. Officers had also recovered a knife from a location linked to the suspects. though they couldn't confirm if it was the murder weapon. During interviews, none of the men gave much away. Khan denied everything. Mia kept silent. Ali and Naeem admitted being at the scene, but claimed they didn't know a killing would happen. Still, the case built around them was solid. The motive was believed to be drugs. Sainaj had been carrying heroin and crack cocaine at the time of his death. Messages on his phone suggested he was actively dealing and may have crossed someone higher up the chain. He told the taxi driver just minutes before he was stabbed, "They're going to kill me." That wasn't just panic, it was knowledge. With the suspects charged and a trial date set, prosecutors now had to convince a jury. It wasn't going to be difficult. The evidence was stacked high and the violence of the killing was undeniable. Justice finally was on the way. In early 2024, the 4 accused men stood trial at the Old Bailey, the same court that has seen some of the country's most serious criminal cases. The courtroom was packed. Police officers, journalists, and family members of Anselam Sainaj. Everyone wanted to hear how and why the brutal killing of a man in the back of a taxi had happened. The prosecution laid out the case in clear detail. They explained how the group had used a stolen silver Mitsubishi to trap the taxi carrying Sainaj. CCTV showed the vehicle pulling up, and within seconds, 3 men had jumped out. 2 were masked, armed with blades up to 2 feet long. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. One of them stabbed Sainaj through the open window as he tried to hide in the corner of the back seat. The jury heard that the entire attack lasted less than a minute, but it was enough to take a life. Prosecutor Alexandra Healy KC pointed to Khan as the ringleader. He was the one who delivered the fatal stab. He was also the one who had fled to Amsterdam, only to be tracked down and returned. According to the Crown, this showed guilt and fear. Khan claimed he left the country for personal reasons, but his timing said otherwise. Samuel Mir was also accused of murder. He admitted to carrying a knife but denied being the one who used it. The jury saw through that. His movements before and after the stabbing placed him right at the scene, side by side with Khan. Zain Ali and Ibrahim Naeem were both charged with murder but ultimately convicted of manslaughter. The jury decided they were involved in the ambush, but they didn't deliver the fatal blow. Ali, who had been released from prison shortly before the attack, had picked up the victim and arranged the taxi. Naeem was driving the getaway car. During the trial, Sainaj's phone records and drug-dealing links were presented. Though his criminal activity wasn't on trial, the prosecution suggested that the attack was related to a drug dispute, possibly over territory or unpaid debts. Whatever the motive, the jury agreed that the ambush was pre-planned and deliberate. One of the most emotional moments came when Sainaj's cousin read a victim impact statement. She looked directly at the defendants and called them cowards. She said they weren't men. They were boys with knives, hiding behind numbers and weapons. After weeks of evidence and arguments, the jury returned with their verdicts. Khan and Mia were found guilty of murder. Both faced life sentences. Ali and Naeem, found guilty of manslaughter, braced for years behind bars. The trial had stripped back every excuse, every lie, and every attempt to shift blame. Now, only one thing remained: sentencing. For the killers of Anselam Sainaj, Judgment Day had finally arrived. By the time the trial ended at the Old Bailey, all 4 men involved in the killing of Anselam Sainaj had faced justice. The courtroom was packed with family members, legal teams and press, all waiting to hear what sentences the judge would hand down for a killing that had shocked even hardened detectives. Muhammad Saqib Khan, 24, was found guilty of murder. The court heard how he had been the one to stab Sainaj through the taxi window with a blade nearly 2 feet long. He was also convicted of possessing a bladed weapon. His role was central. Not only did he carry out the fatal attack, but he also orchestrated the ambush. After the killing, he fled the country, hoping to avoid justice by hiding in Amsterdam. But his time abroad was short-lived. He was arrested and extradited back to the UK in January. Judge Judy Khan KC described his actions as callous and calculated and handed him a life sentence with a minimum of 26 years. Samuel Mir, who had already been convicted in a separate case of raping a 15-year-old girl in a North London park, also received a life sentence. He had taken part in the stabbing and was found guilty of murder and possession of a blade. Judge Khan noted that Mir's offending painted an extremely disturbing picture of someone who not only carried out acts of violence but seemed comfortable doing so. He was ordered to serve a minimum of 25 years before he would be eligible for parole. Zain Ali and Ibrahim Naim, both from East Ham, were acquitted of murder but convicted of manslaughter. Their involvement was still serious. Ali had taken the lead in tracking Sainaj, ensuring he got into the taxi before alerting the others. Naim was the driver of the stolen silver Mitsubishi that blocked the cab and allowed the killers to carry out their attack. Both men were sentenced for their roles in enabling the murder. Ali was jailed for 14 years. Naim received 10 years and 6 months. In her statement to the court, Sainaj's cousin, Elra Sainaj, addressed the defendants directly. She said, "You're cowards. You're little boys, and you always will be. You needed numbers and weapons to carry out your task. You fought like boys, not men. It wasn't even a level playing field." The words hit hard. The court fell silent as the full emotional weight of the crime settled in. The killing hadn't been a scuffle or a spontaneous fight. It was a planned ambush, carried out in public, with weapons, masks, and a stolen car. And for what? A murky dispute over drugs, something no one could fully explain or understand. Detective Sergeant Brett Hagen, who led the investigation for the Met Police, later praised the tireless work of the officers involved. He said, "This was a brutal, cold-blooded killing that lasted only seconds but cost a man his life. The planning behind it, the speed of the attack, and the attempts to cover their tracks made it a difficult case to crack. But thanks to the hard work of our team and the support of partner agencies across Europe, we brought every single suspect to justice." And now, with all 4 men behind bars, the investigation had reached its end. But for Anselm Sainaj's family, the grief was far from over. His life was taken in a moment. A young man caught in a conflict he may never have fully understood, cut down in the back of a taxi by people who saw his life as nothing more than a score to settle. The prison sentences may have closed the case, but the real cost will always be felt far beyond the courtroom.